as an FBI special agent was my dream job. My whistleblowing was apolitical and in the spirit of upholding my oath. Nonetheless, the FBI cynically elected to close ranks and attack the messenger.
The FBI will crush you. This government will crush you and your family if you try to expose the truth about things that they are doing that are wrong. We are all examples of that.
Joining us now are Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, fellas.
FBI whistleblowers Steve Friend and Garrett O'Boyle both join us now. Gentlemen, so glad to have you on the program. Thank you for your testimony.
We need more folks like you, and I'm sure more people are going to be from your background are going to be giving you guys more intel as you're sharing that with the rest of us. We can kind of see that this is becoming normal for them to be held accountable, because I think especially an institution that we pay their salaries, they need to be held accountable.
I think a lot of people do share our beliefs and convictions. I think they just aren't at the point that Steve and I and others have gotten to. They're too afraid.
Thank you so much for being a guest here on PBD Podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How big is that bloody flag that Steve's got? It's the stone wall of his house. Lots of love, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, thank you for being with us this morning. More importantly, thank you for speaking out. We appreciate it.
You're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a brand new week, Tuesday morning, 0830, live streaming to you on Rumble. Rumble.com/amradpod is where you can always find us on Tuesday and Thursday at this time slot, 0830, noontime on Saturday. As long as you're here, guys, make sure that you are smashing the thumbs up and following the channel. You want to subscribe, that's fantastic, supports the program. Do definitely subscribe to the audio format, which we've had an uptick in. Hoping to expand it even further. So if you listen to us on iTunes or Spotify or iHeart, be sure to subscribe so you can get the new shows when we drop them. All right, today it's a brand new week. 59-minute rule is a rolling, and we're going to be talking about targeted people, targeted individuals. You know, I don't have any evidence about chips being implanted on anyone. I don't know anything about the chemtrails or the Havana syndrome. We're actually going to talk about evidence that is in the evidence chamber already. We have the receipts on what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about some schizophrenics who are targeted by the FBI because of the FBI playbook. And then we're going to expand that out to just private corporations that are doing things that the federal government is upset about. All that, so much more. Glad to get into it today on a brand new week. Hope it was a great weekend for you and my co-host as well, Garrett O'Boyle. Social media at GOB Actual is where you can find him. And look, guys, just give him a follow. He's falling behind here. And I know that I'm stepped on, but no excuse for Garrett. He's at least, just the worst he's going to give you is a Bible quote. Come on.
It's true, Steve. It's true. I perhaps have already tweeted out at least one of those today, but it would that it were maybe even in the alleged free version of Twitter or X. I think people of my persuasion still get stamped, trampled on if we're spouting things from the good book.
I was told that the key to expanding and exploding your X account is subscribing to Elon Musk.
Oh.
And it's $4. It seems like if Elon actually contrived that to make himself a cool few $1,000,000, that's pretty smart. But now, just as a matter of principle, I'm not going to do it. It's like the fact that I've never watched Napoleon Dynamite just because everybody told me I had to. I will not come off this one.
So you don't get the tater tot references or anything?
Nope.
What about?
And I'm proud.
I'm gonna throw this football over those mountains.
Nope. No idea what you're talking about. Can't comment, but I'm comfortable with that as well. So
I might have to go subscribe to Elon because, you know what? This is late breaking news, Steve. I've long wanted to participate in a social experiment to try and get me. I don't think it's possible, but maybe if I subscribe to Elon. But I want to see if it's possible for because it'll prove two things. Well, It'll prove at least one thing, that you are indeed being stepped on X, but also it may prove the the gumption of the AMRAD followership. I have about 16,500 followers on X right now. I want to say you're somewhere around 65,000. Is that accurate?
I think it's 68, but yeah, that's pretty
68.
close.
Okay. You're close to 70. I want to see if I can surpass your followership. But you know what? We don't even reach like 10,000 people, so I have a feeling that this is going to be an exercise in futility.
Look, before we get to the subject of the day, this is my pledge to you. When I get to 99,999 followers and I cross the threshold and get to six figures, I want you to stop following me and then refollow so you can have that designation as being my 100K guy.
Yes, I will do that.
All right, let's get to our ex-girlfriend. That's where we're going to start it today because
Always a good
you were
topic.
good at finding some of these, man. You've been mining for them and outdoing me, which is why you're also worth a follow at GOB Actual.
In fairness, though, Steve, I like skim it, and I think Steve would be better at this
Just
than me.
throw it to the Roomba to just suck up the information. All right, schizophrenic man inspired FBI controversial memo targeting Catholics. Well, the Suspendables broke the Catholic intelligence report. The radical traditional Catholic came from the Richmond field office. Friend of the program, Kyle Seraphin, broke that, and it basically implied that people who attend the Latin Mass, because they had a preference for pro-life, pro-border sovereignty, pro-traditional marriage, pro-Second Amendment, they were radical extremists primed to be anti-government extremists. And that was what was exposed. Total, great accountability from the Congress. There's been lots of people who've been held to account for that or not. But good on Kyle for bringing that forward. But now we're able to find out a little bit more insight into it. So according to this report, the FBI's intelligence report was crafted by analysts involved in an unrelated investigation into a schizophrenic man who began attending traditional Catholic church in early 2022. His name was Xavier Lopez. Interesting because he wasn't a white supremacist, but Lopez was arrested November 2022 on a slew of domestic extremism related charges. His mental health diagnosis was revealed during the criminal proceedings. According to records from the case, Lopez was on law enforcement's radar since 2018 when he attempted suicide. So he attempted suicide, and the FBI started to look at him as a terrorist. Lopez was 18 years old at the time. The FBI opened an assessment about a year later after he allegedly made online statements advocating for civil war and the murder of politicians. In the spring of 2022, FBI Richmond placed a confidential human source,
There you go.
Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Chapel, to interact with Lopez to determine if he was inciting or planning violence. The FBI expressed concerns to the Inspector General that Lopez may have been recruiting other parishioners to carry out the attack. There's nothing in the charging document against Lopez to suggest that he was actually recruiting the Catholics for an attack. Rather, the available evidence suggests that Lopez was interested in the Catholic Church to find a girlfriend.
Steve, only in the FBI are you going to get them to even buy into the idea that the crazy guy who attends my church is going to be recruiting other parishioners. Like, give me a break, dude. Like, that's just not
started
going to happen.
before he went to the church. It'd be one thing even, and man, you want to talk about like a violation of oath, but I don't know what the reporting requirements are. But let's say that you worked at the parish. Let's say you were actually a priest, and it wasn't given to you in confession, but you say this guy has exhibiting radical behavior. He's erratic. He might be emotionally disturbed. I'm going to report this to the authorities. Right.
Right.
Then that is the background. But this was all looking at him before that. He tried to commit suicide. He's clearly off his rocker. We poked him already. We found out about his online activity. How are we going to get at him? And if you read further into that piece from Headline USA, they basically articulated to the Inspector General that this was our only opportunity to poke him because he either was at home or at church, which to me sounds like the guy was trying to find his way.
Yeah. Which, on one hand, good on him for going to the church. That's a great place to start. And if he's got schizophrenia or other mental illness, he certainly has a spiritual void going on too. Most likely, I guess maybe not certainly, but most likely he does. And so his spiritual fitness, for some reason, was important to him, and maybe the crux of that was to try to find a wife. Okay, fine, but at least he's looking in the church for that, not somewhere else. And the church can only do so much. So your example of talking to the priest, and the priest like, oh man, maybe this guy is actually planning something. But also, even a paranoid schizophrenic, is he going to even be that upfront with a member of clergy to say, hey, I have these thoughts? But then on top of it, and we've talked about this before, a true threat. If he's only at home or at church, how much of a threat is the guy? And
What's he
then,
recruiting them to go hang out at his house?
yeah, his house or his church. Like, and then on top of it, we talked about this too with the last example of the paranoid schizophrenic, the guy who was a teenager and then enlisted in the army. And here, very similar. Instead of intervening and saying, this guy's posting stuff that is not good, not appropriate. He's, they say inciting civil war. I'd like to know what the posts actually said. But let's say it's a legitimate post where he is trying to incite civil war, which I find highly suspect to begin with. But let's say it is for the sake of the argument. And again, the FBI, instead of stepping in and intervening pre Civil War, which isn't going to happen, this schizophrenic isn't going to incite a civil war, but they step in ahead of time and say, hey, dude, you're posting stuff you shouldn't be posting. What can we do to help you? Or other avenues. The FBI, you've probably tweeted one of their tweets where they talk about their like victim assistance program or whatever. This guy's a victim of his own mental illness. Why don't you get appropriate channels involved to take care of? Or if you're an FBI agent and you come across this information, why are you not contacting the local police or sheriff's office and saying, hey, I got this information, I'll go with you, but I think you guys need to do a welfare check on this guy and see if criteria is met for him to be chaptered on a mental hold, like we talked about recently too.
And we know why, because they want to hit their stat quotas, and then they couch that in an argument of, well, we're not social workers, we're not doing the hug a thug. This isn't that at all.
Right.
This is basically what you do if you work in law enforcement, which the FBI purports to do. They claim to be the nation's premier law enforcement agency. That doesn't mean that the handcuffs have to go on everyone who you identify, because we have to prove that and justify having opened the case to begin with, which apparently they opened in 2019
Oh gosh.
and carried it forward for multiple years. 2022, I think, is
Yeah.
really when that was going on.
There it is
And
again, hitting your metrics year after year.
spun it out. But this is not even recent, right? I mean, I think I do enough speaking engagements, you as well. People throw the same types of questions to you when they're not talking about being targeted individuals suffering from Havana syndrome. They ask about, is this since the Biden administration came in? Is it just Christopher Wray, the only change we need to make? That's a conversation for another day. But I want to set the foundation for this is a track record. We've had Trevor Aronson come on. We've had Murtaza Hussein come on, talk about older cases that slip past the radar, especially if you're a conservative. You don't tend to read things that come from The Intercept. But this one we're able to find that comes from 2017, which would have been during the Trump administration and probably from before, right? If the case was longstanding. But I have a news report. It's about a guy named Jerry Drake Varnell of Oklahoma City. And this is the local news reporting his arrest. We'll give this a play and then find out a little bit more about Jerry.
A 23-year-old man is accused of trying to detonate what he thought was a massive bomb in Oklahoma City, just blocks from the site of the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building. Omar Villafranca has more from Oklahoma City.
A confidential informant alerted the FBI to Jerry Drake Varnell's plan to blow up an Oklahoma City bank, describing him as someone upset with the government and seeking retaliation. In the criminal complaint, Varnell wanted to pull off an attack similar to the Oklahoma City bombing, adding, "I'm out for blood. When militias start getting formed, I'm going after government officials." The informant introduced Varnell to an undercover FBI agent posing as someone who could help him get bomb-making supplies and plan the attack. Raul Buhanda is with the FBI.
Varnell then began acquiring components for what he believed would make a 1,000-pound improvised explosive device.
Last Friday, Varnell assembled what he thought was a working bomb and tried to detonate it with a cell phone.
He parked the van in the alley of Bank First and fled to a safe location in order to remotely detonate the bomb.
Varnell followed the Three Percenters, an extremist anti-government group.
All right, we'll stop it there. So that sounds like the playbook very much, with the exception of the initial piece. Is he a vulnerable person? He's a 3%er. We know he's an anti-government extremist. Maybe he's out there trying to actually advocate for the overthrow of the government. Maybe he's calling to violence. I mean, advocating for something and actually directing a violent activity are different categories of speech, which is why there's the second piece to that. And this comes from reporting at CBS News.
Of all
I guess they were a little more interested in goings on and happenings at the FBI when they didn't like who was in charge of the executive branch. So the family, the FBI knew Oklahoma bomb plot suspect is schizophrenic. According to a statement from his parents, Varnell lived with them and was jobless due to his schizophrenia. He did not have the resources to carry out such an act alone. He suffered through countless serious, full-blown schizophrenic delusional episodes and has been put in numerous mental hospitals since he was 16 years old. The statement added that his parents are his legal guardians and do all they can to keep him safe and functional. Sounds like a vulnerable person.
I mean, Steve, like, it's almost getting old, or maybe I'm just a little more ornery today. I don't know, because how many examples do we need? How many do we need for people to truly wake up and say the FBI is an objective force for evil at this point? And look, a lot of this, I didn't know, but when I was an FBI agent or when I was a cop hoping to be one, I didn't know how insidious this problem was. And quite frankly, it goes back throughout the entire history of the FBI. Really since its inception, and it continued. It was different groups that they were targeting over time. It was the Japanese, it was the FBI who was putting them in internment camps. It was communists. It was
Vietnam War draft dodgers.
And then it was civil rights activists like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And then it was militias or communists down in South America in the 80s. And then the 90s, you got Waco and Ruby Ridge and after 2000. I mean, how many examples do we need? How many? And it just continues decade after decade, year after year, day after day. And it just is like business as usual. And here you have CBS. And I think you're right, is Donald Trump was the president at the time. And the FBI was doing the same crap then as they're doing now. And it's only, I would say it's only intensifying now.
What's interesting, though, is there is a duality to that reporting, to use a Kamala Harris favorite word, because they want to say, ooh, the FBI under Donald Trump's leadership is entrapping citizens, but he is a far-right guy.
Yeah.
So he's not really sympathetic to them. Maybe they just had accidental journalism happening. That's gone bye-bye a long time ago.
And like on top of it, too, it's like, I don't know if this was the case with like the Whitmer Fednapping hoax, like if any of those guys had mental issues going into it. But again, it's the playbook. It's a CI, a CHS, as the FBI calls them, as listeners know, it's confidential human source. Then it's an undercover employee, whether online or in person. And again, it's providing what the subject believed to be explosive materials. I mean,
and do you think if he's living home and completely indigent and relying on his parents, then he's therefore capable of assembling the bomb or even financially having the resources to do it? No.
Right.
So I would love to see what they reported. He bought 1,500 pounds of fertilizer for $48.
Yeah.
Right. Something absurd that he would think, oh, okay, because he's schizophrenic, crazy, basically retarded.
Yeah. Or his friend, quote unquote friend that he met online. That's the undercover. just supplied it to him. Like, oh, hey, I'll don't worry about it. I'll get it and I'll just have somebody deliver it to you. And it's like, it's very frustrating, man. Very frustrating to see these cases. And I know this one is a little older, but it it just continues to perpetuate itself. And then even the fact that it was near the Oklahoma City, the
Oh,
Mirror
yeah, you
building.
don't think that that was
Right,
intentional?
right. And do
They
you think
reference it later in that clip, in that news clip. They go, "Ironically, we're here at the courthouse across the street from where the Timothy McVeigh bomb went off," where they talk about Timothy McVeigh being a radical right-winger. He
Mhm.
wasn't, by the way.
Right.
And you know what? He didn't get arrested by the FBI. A cop got him. So for all the talk about America's premier law enforcement agency, a state trooper got Timothy McVeigh. But well, before we close this out, what happened to Mr. Varnell? Schizophrenic. Parents told you he's been institutionalized multiple times. What would be an appropriate thing here? Well, DOJ got to claim that scalp.
Of course.
Man who attempted to bomb downtown Oklahoma City, sentenced to 25 years
25
in federal
years.
prison.
Dude.
Lock him up, throw away the key, and hopefully by the time he comes out at age 46, 47, they've gotten the meds correct.
Yeah, yeah, and you think does anybody actually think he's gonna be better off? I mean, give me a break, dude. And then
Would we be better off with him there?
no,
No. We'd be better
nobody.
off with him in Arkham Asylum.
Right, right. And going back to the CBS piece, the parents knew that they were taking care of him. He couldn't work, and the FBI knew. And still, he gets 25 years. Because that's how the system works. That's how the playbook works. That's how broken it is. Dude, I'm like pissed, dude. I'm pissed. And I knew this story, and I'm pissed.
Well, and that's historical. That's 7 years ago that happened. Let's talk about one that is current. It's not a low IQ person, but vulnerable nonetheless, not because of their low intelligence or emotional disturbance or youth, but just because of their ideology is something that the Biden and Harris administration are uber offended by. And that's Eithan Haim, whose case and trial and tribulations are ongoing. It's going to be hard to read here. I'm just for memorialization. I got this thread that Eaton put out on his X profile, but I pulled some excerpts from it to sort of explain his update. He's got multiple updates to his prosecution, but for just review, Eithan Haim, surgeon, works for Texas Children's Hospital at the time this is going on. He realizes that they're doing transgender procedures on children in violation of Texas state law. He gets the medical documents and takes out the personal identifying information, brings it to media. I don't know if he took it to law enforcement or not, but he doesn't work for the government. Different laws, different protections for him. That's what he does. He gets prosecuted by the federal government. He gets prosecuted because they say not that he released private medical information, but that he accessed it improperly.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in hard with him with the federal indictment. So here is the update from, is it Ethan or Eaton?
It's Eithan.
Eithan?
Yeah.
All right. So Eithan, quote, last month, the DOJ's case was blown apart, the truth revealing the remarkable absurdity of their arguments. This happened after the DOJ disclosed bombshell evidence to my legal team on September 13th. This came to us at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday, which also happened to be the last business day before a critical deadline. We had to file a response by Monday. In a motion from September 6th, so they waited a week to give it to him, they state, after January 2021, the defendant had no patients under his care at Texas Children's Hospital. So January 2021. In the same motion, they go on to say that on April 19, 2023, the defendant emailed an administrator at Texas Children's Hospital urgently requesting that his logging credentials be restored so he could have accessed operative cases he was covering. They emphatically state their conclusion in 4 words: this was a lie. The DOJ's claim that after January 2021, the defendant had no patients under his care at Texas Children's Hospital was completely false. What we found is that the evidence that they gave us disproved their own allegations. Their own evidence showed I was seeing patients at Texas Children's Hospital after January 2021. Did they even go through their own discovery before filing their indictment? Or did they assume I would opt for a plea deal just to make it all go away, leaving these errors to go undiscovered? Pause it there. Where do you want to take this? Hubris? Tyranny? I'll let you drive for a little while, Garrett. You're muted.
All of the above is what I say, because I had a screaming child in the background, so I muted it while you were
She
going
doesn't
through.
like how, what happened to Eithan.
And she shouldn't. She shouldn't. So maybe we're raising them right over here. But it's so where I want to go with this is just from an investigative standpoint, from an FBI agent standpoint, which actually I don't even know. It wasn't the FBI, I don't think, who investigated this. It was like DHS or somebody. Irrelevant, because just an investigator, or no, it wasn't DHS, because they wouldn't fall under whatever.
HHS.
HHS. Okay.
HHS.
HHS, it doesn't matter that the DOJ entity, as the investigator, the criminal investigator, you're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they probably have a system that is similar to what the FBI has, which is the housing platform for your documents, your essentially your police reports that you write, whatever information you're getting in, that you're obtaining through subpoenas or through physical surveillance or through interviews with people involved at the hospital or with Aton or the case. And then it's all going into one location under your case. I'm sure HHS has a case number, just like regular old police departments do, and the FBI, and it's all housed there. And you can go back as the case agent or anybody who has access to it and look at all the documents, all the reports, all the interviews. And I'm assuming that they had the information that he was seeing patients because they got it from the hospital. Now, a good investigator is going to look at that information and read it and understand it. And when I would get information like that maybe was Excel spreadsheets or schedules or whatever it may have been, I would go through it and I would add those things as attachments to a report that I would summarize then of what that information was. So if I came back a year later and was like, oh yeah, what was this? What was all this information? I can read my summary of what it was. And in law enforcement in this country, if you find information that is contrary to what you believe and contrary to other information that you thought you knew, that's called exculpatory information, which means that it vindicates the subject of your case. Now, it doesn't necessarily vindicate them 100% from the alleged crimes that you're investigating, but that information needs to be included and it needs to be handed over in discovery, which it was, because here Eitan is saying we got this information from them. When we went through discovery, they gave it to us. Yet in their court filings, they flat out say this was a lie. And they may argue that they didn't know. They didn't do this knowingly. They didn't go after Eitan for seeing okay, so they claimed that he was not actively seeing patients and that he accessed this information about patients under false pretenses. But the information that they had proved that was false. And yet they put in their court filings anyways that Eitan was lying, when in fact they were. And at a minimum, they weren't lying. They were just bad at their job, which I don't know what's worse. I tend to think that they probably knew and they were hoping that Eitan, like he said, would just take a plea deal so they could just add another scalp to the wall, or that he would somehow miss this information. Even though, think about it, he's the doctor. He knows that he was working and actively seeing patients during this time frame, and yet the government says he was lying. Oh man, I'm fired up on these topics, Steve.
This is what happens when you're not interested in following the process and you're only interested in the outcome. That's when you hide evidence or even manufacture your own types of evidence. Said it before, I'll say it again. The facts support the conviction ultimately, or they don't. If the facts don't support the conviction, then you don't get it. That's not a loss on your part. It just means the person there's not beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed that crime. the facts don't support it. It's not because you are a crummy cop or a crummy prosecutor. And just, I mean, just to give it, I guess, a little bit of a different example would be like if there was a surveillance camera of an entrance to a business that was closed and they see Garrett walk in the door. And then they'll find out the next day that the business got robbed. Well, that's pretty compelling evidence. And then they indict him. But then all of a sudden they realize, oh, there was a back entrance to the business and there's a video camera there. And wouldn't you know it, Steve walked in. Well, that's exculpatory. It doesn't mean that Garrett didn't commit the robbery or the burglary. It just adds a little bit of mud to it. So that's something that Garrett could use to defend himself. So giving maximum latitude, maximum benefit of the doubt, which they don't deserve because I'm 100% sure that they didn't read through this and that they purposely withheld it when they indicted him. Let's just say that they did such a crappy investigation that they said, well, he wasn't treating patients, even though he was working at the hospital for 2 extra years. He wasn't treating patients, though. I don't know why a surgeon would be working at the hospital, but then again, it is the government. It's incompetent people doing incompetent things incompetently. They just learned that, wouldn't you know it, the surgeon was seeing patients at the hospital during the time that he was accessing medical records at the hospital of patients at the hospital. They have to turn it over. And they did. And that bodes really well for his defense, right? Well, you would think that maybe they would think that the process was so screwy that they could dismiss charges because that would substantiate, that sort of decision would be substantiated. They didn't do that. So even going back to his Twitter thread, and I'll just read a couple of other things here because we've gotten a couple other updates. The Department of Justice imbibed that revelation, and they did what is called a superseding indictment. So it's a correction. Let's say you had a typo. Let's say you got some more facts. You're going to come in with the new charges. Side note, that means that those agents claimed a second indictment, extra bonus stats for their own mistake. They didn't erase the earlier one. They claimed a second indictment of him. Bizarrely, the DOJ doubled down on the false pretenses in the second indictment. The DOJ concedes that they presented false information to the first grand jury, but they just didn't do so knowingly.
Yeah, sure.
Again, maximum latitude. You made a mistake. Go in there and correct the record. By correcting the record, you've now said that the entire premise of your case is no good because the premise is he accessed medical information that he shouldn't have had. Well, he's a surgeon. He's able to access medical information. We're done here. But the DOJ, according to this Twitter thread, says that they want to limit his defense now also because we're not interested in the process. It's the outcome. So they're pushing to limit his defense, saying that his testimony can't use mutilation and sterilization because it's too inflammatory and inaccurate. Is sterilization inaccurate if you cut off your genitals? I think that's a scientific term, right?
Yeah,
Medical?
that's the medical term. And who is the DOJ to say that it's
They're the arbiter of
inaccurate?
truth, don't
Yeah,
you know?
right. They're not the doctors here. Eithan is. Like it, and then on top of it, you have Texas, who said that the hospitals in Texas weren't supposed to be doing transgender care like that.
It wasn't. He didn't bring it to the DOJ. He said it was a violation of state law.
Right. And then the feds step in it anyways. Of course they do, because they stump for the regime, and Eithan's a target of the regime. And then on top of it, like Steve just laid out for us, they should have rescinded the first indictment and said, you know what? He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't break any laws. We're done here.
That's color of law. This is color of law.
Yes.
Violation of rights. Any prosecutor, any investigator involved in this deserves to be locked up in a cage.
Yes. They should be.
And I'm being charitable. Like I think that you forfeit your right to be alive if you do this to someone.
I mean,
but I know that I'm radical on that one.
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
let you be in Leavenworth for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's generous. And, you mentioned it, Steve.
You're willing to put an innocent person in a cage so you can hit stats and push a political agenda?
And then to just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it.
I'm with you. Committed now. They're pot committed entirely.
Mm-hmm.
They have to.
Yep. I'm with you 100%. I'm going to pop it up here. The color of law information. This is from the freaking Justice Department itself.
Civil Rights Division. Crown jewel.
Who would investigate this? The FBI would. So where is the investigation on this AUSA or even the entire U.S. Attorney's Office that's involved with this, and the HHS, and definitely the agents on the case? For those just listening, it's DOJ's website, deprivation of rights under color of law. Section 242 of Title 18 makes it a crime for a person acting under color of any law to willfully deprive a person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States. For the purpose of Section 242, acts under color of law include acts not only done by federal, state, or local officials within their lawful authority, but also acts done beyond the bounds of that official's lawful authority. If the acts are done while the official is purporting to or pretending to act in the performance of his or her official duties, which is exactly what is going on here. But instead, Eithan gets a superseding indictment. He's trying to raise more money for his attorneys who are trying to defend him when it shouldn't even freaking exist.
Because the
Oh, man.
process is the punishment. Even if they don't get the result they want, they're going to get him tarred and feathered publicly. He's going to struggle to be able to operate in his medical license. It might be pulled at this point. I don't know. I mean, because it's not by law. The medical boards can just pull it, right? Same thing they can do for like the bar for attorneys, and they're going to try to bankrupt this guy who was just out of school. I presume that he might have a little bit of medical debt, or medical school debt, but
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know the situation. But all that to say, they're going to ruin his life because he said that, hey, the hospital here is doing these treatments that are illegal in our state.
Right.
Well, I'm just going to be the town crier on that. He
Yeah.
didn't even render an opinion on whether or not it was right or wrong. He just said it was illegal. Right.
Yep. Which and that's the piece. And I don't know. It's probably similar as far as non-government employees or non-law enforcement employees, as far as like whistleblower protection goes. Like, you have to have a reasonable belief. Well, how is this unreasonable?
He has the records that he was entitled to have, despite what the Department of Justice
and he's the bad
alleges.
guy. And you know, we won't see it even out of a place like Texas. But wouldn't you just love to see the Texas Rangers say, you know what, we opened a state case? Because I guarantee you, Texas has similar color of law statutes. Most places do. Like, you can't use your authority to do something illegal. I mean, you know, just go watch Lackluster or Audit the Audit on YouTube. I know I've mentioned them before. You see it; their whole channels are dedicated to essentially color of law violations. Sometimes they put in positive examples, but by and large, it's law enforcement violating the law because they're acting under color of law to violate your rights. And
I want something more visceral. I want the governor of the state of Texas to post state guardsmen or Texas Rangers outside Eithan's house and say, come and get him.
Yeah.
That's what's going to be required.
Mhm.
But we're unfortunately for Texas, they have Greg Abbott, who is comparably milquetoast to Mitt Romney. Are you ready to pivot off to some other ones? Because there are definitely some more targeted individuals out there, including the richest human to ever walk the earth. Him and the wildlife. I'm waiting on PETA for this one. But this was a video that came from Elon Musk saying the United States government is forcing him to kidnap baby seals. That's not a Babylon Bee headline. The United States government is forcing Elon Musk to kidnap baby seals. Give it a play.
One of the things that's pretty wild is for launching out of Vandenberg in California, they were worried about seal procreation, whether the seals would be dismayed by the sonic booms. Now, there have been a lot of rockets launched out of Vandenberg, and the seal population has steadily increased. So if anything, rocket booms are an aphrodisiac, based on the evidence, if you correlate rocket launches with seal population. Nonetheless, we were forced to kidnap a seal, strap it to a board, put headphones on the seal, and play sonic boom sounds to it to see if it would be distressed. This is an actual thing that happened. This is actually real. I have pictures.
I would love to see this. Yeah.
That's a,
Sorry,
it's a
there's a seal with headphones.
Yes, it's a seal with headphones strapped to a board.
There you go. So they did that because that's what we covered on a little bit last episode, Garrett, the Vandenberg base where the California Commission is stopping him because of his free speech. They're throwing up everything they possibly can. They say that the sonic booms are interfering with the seal reproduction. And we're willing to take one of our cherished seals that we care so much about and strap it to a board with headphones, which I'm sure gives you a very honest and objective response that you get from just ordinary rockets that go off every, I don't know, week and a half once. But let's just strap it down and keep blasting into its ears and see if it freaks out.
And then they forced him to do it, or his companies to do it, instead of the government saying,
I like the idea that Elon himself was there doing it.
yeah, like snatching seals. It's oddly enough, it's similar to something Donald Trump mentioned on Joe Rogan. They were talking about the giant windmill farms on the East Coast and how a bunch
The
of
whales.
the whales are dying. And I forget what he said. He said something hilarious about like wanting to be a whale psychiatrist or something. It was very Trumpian. You know, the Trumpian style is just hilarious to me. But the government's not doing anything about that, or it doesn't seem like they are, because whales keep dying and washing up. But you know, because they need the windmill farms, because that's part of the woke cult. But now when it's Elon and how he's, you know, putting NASA to shame, it's okay, well, what can we do to target him? What can we do to impede? What can we do to slow him down? And you mentioned it, him being the richest man ever, and still the government has that much power to target somebody like him.
Him coming forward now with that, I have to wonder when this demand came up. I, again, am very confident. I would wager a large amount that it happened after he bought Twitter and made it into X, because they are so mad about that one action. And I'm kind of forecasting, looking over the horizon. What I have been doing since January 1st is accumulating news stories that at the time were bombshell. You know, you get the Fox breaking,
Yeah.
and have a whole list. It's going to be for the year end. We're going to wrap up a
Oh,
year in
man.
review.
That's
And
gonna be good.
more and more I'm leaning towards, should we just go through them or look through them, remind people, and then have the caveat of, if Elon Musk hadn't purchased Twitter and made it into X, would you have a different opinion on the story? Would you have ever found out about it?
Yeah.
Because that's what they were the gatekeepers to a lot of information and a lot of narratives, and he took that from them, and they are so mad. They want to
hate
kill
that.
a seal over it.
Yep. Yep. And so they're doubling down as best they can in all the other areas of quote unquote news. You know, like I don't watch any regular news anymore. Like I don't watch CNN, Fox, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, ABC. I don't watch any of it because I can't trust any of it, at least not enough. And I saw stuff on X yesterday talking about how oh, what was it? Like did you see this, like Tony Hinchcliffe guy say some joke over the weekend at the Madison Square Garden rally? I
I
guess
didn't watch any of it, but I guess he said something about Puerto Rico, right?
yeah, I watched the clip and I was like, you know, I mean, the guy's a comedian, you know, but I guess legacy media is like running with it to try to talk about how,
It must have been a pretty good program, that a good event, if that's what they had to lean on.
yeah. And it's
Right.
like, oh, of course the legacy media is going to do that. But then on Twitter, like, or X, you're not seeing hardly anything, you know, some like, oh, you know, Trump is a racist. See, this proves it. And it's like, okay, whatever.
Elon Musk's endorsement of Donald Trump is just going to ramp up the attacks on him for whatever they have, as is the next story that we have. And this was a week ago or 2 weeks ago that Donald Trump did his photo shoot at the McDonald's, right? The photo op, which doesn't do it for me, but it does it for other people. So
Apparently.
it is what it is, right? But he does it, and you know, he's got his red tie on with his silly apron, and he's wagging the Happy Meal out the window, and people got a kick out of it. And again, the pearl clutching that ensued from that. And side note, I read a book by Rick Riley years ago before he went uber leftist crazy, and he was a writer for Sports Illustrated. And he wrote a book where he played around a golf with all these famous people, including Donald Trump. He wasn't a bad guy at that time.
Oh, how about
And
that?
Donald Trump said to him, when I've always thought was a good point. He said, Donald Trump said that he did an advertisement, a commercial for McDonald's. And I remember the commercial. He had like this mock architecture model in front of him, and the new Trump Tower, whatever he was building, was like 88 times larger than anything that was in the model. And he was like, it's not big enough. He was making fun of himself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
His compensation for that commercial included a card that he could carry in his wallet that he could eat for free at any McDonald's for the rest of his life.
That's why he eats so much McDonald's.
And he said to Rick Riley, if I walk by a homeless man in the street and I've declared bankruptcy, and I'll know that homeless man actually has a higher net worth than me, but I'll always be able to eat. I'm like, all right, ROI, good for you, bud.
Yeah.
But McDonald's violated what the legacy media and what the narrative wants. And wouldn't you know it, right after that, we had an E. coli breakout.
Yeah.
Where
Dun,
the
dun.
CDC,
Of course we did.
the Center for Disease Control, was very excited to announce this. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't report E. coli, but I couldn't help but find that timing to be convenient for that, right? And it was 50 confirmed cases across 10 different states. The CDC was very excited to put that out. And CDC, the FDA, the USDA, and FSIS,
Get them
and
all
public health
involved.
officials, multiple states, they said that it was the quarter pounder hamburger that did it. Maybe it was one of those few that Donald Trump handed out that day.
Yeah.
But that wasn't enough. How many others picked up on this story about McDonald's? Democratic senators slam McDonald's for menu price hikes they say have outpaced inflation.
Dude.
This one comes from NBC News. So 3 Democrat senators are asking McDonald's about its menu price hikes in recent years, arguing that the increases are higher than they should be, even with inflation and rising operating costs. In a letter sent from Elizabeth Warren, Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, swing state and up for re-election, and Ron Wyden of Oregon demanded that McDonald's president and CEO Chris Kempczynski explain the chain's pricing decisions. Okay, pause it there. And I have one more story on this topic. I would like for Chris, because I don't want to butcher his last name again, to drop double birds to these people and say, it's my company, and if I want to make a Big Mac $25, you can't do anything about it.
Right. And
go to hell.
Yeah. Oh, dude, this is like, you can't make this crap up, man. You really can't. The E. coli outbreak, and maybe it's legitimate. I don't know. I
think they probably sprinkled it in there.
Yeah. I find it skeptical. I think there's some bioterrorism afoot. And of course, to target McDonald's, because this is a greater piece of it, is because
is the price gouging going on in the Hurricane Helene areas only? Because that's what price gouging is.
Yeah.
It is nothing. Oh, I've got questions about the prices there.
Sure,
that's not legitimate. And I'm very, very dubious of the E. coli for the last
very
piece.
dubious.
The last piece that I have, and this one comes from QZ.com. I think it stands for Quartz. Yeah, it's Quartz.com. From their business news section. And this is ultimately what it is. And this is why you're tying it into the targeted. McDonald's is targeted. And I don't want to defend McDonald's, but I will. McDonald's stock gets a downgrade because of the E. coli outbreak is a significant threat.
You know,
that's how it's described.
Okay.
Financial services firm Baird has downgraded its rating of McDonald's to neutral due to increasing concerns over an E. coli outbreak linked to the chain's quarter pounder hamburgers. So we're going to wreck you. It was like 30% stock hit they took.
Dude, that's insane. I mean, honestly, I hope they bounce back from it, because it's clear that this is and it's the onions, I thought. Isn't that what they determined? So get rid of the onions and get fresh onions in there, and no big deal. You know, also, is this going to, for most people who eat at McDonald's, is this going to stop them? Has it stopped them?
Like, roll the dice on that poison.
You know, like, it's ridiculous, dude. And it makes me think of totalitarianism. Like, that's what this is. I think the other day I said late stage republic. Well, maybe what is more accurate is like early stage wrong one. Is early stage totalitarianism, because here's your definition from Britannica. Totalitarianism, form of government that theoretically permits no individual freedom and that seeks to subordinate all aspects of individual life to the authority of the state. Well, what is it? Is it not? Isn't everything being subjected to the authority of the state right here? Whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Eithan, whether it's schizophrenics being targeted by the FBI. I mean, it is endless. There is an endless quantity of people who are targeted by the state under the authority of the state, because the state is seeking to subordinate all aspects of individual life. If you don't agree with the state, if you don't preach the woke rhetoric of the state, if you don't bow down to the DEI LGBTQ plus altar of the state, you can't live an individually free life. And these are all examples of that.
They're past, present, and I got one more that's future. And that I think is worth sharing. Before we toss it over to Garrett for his final thoughts, I definitely want to throw this and get your thoughts on this. And this comes from the Washington Free Beacon. So it didn't get a lot of circulation. Kamala Harris's far-left climate engagement director accuses oil and gas workers of committing eco-terrorism and weaponizing white supremacy and toxic patriarchy. What sounds like a lovely person there. During an August 22 interview, Camilla Thorndike called anyone who is in the fossil fuel sector to consider putting their talents elsewhere and stop continuing to cook the planet. Months earlier, she accused oil and gas industry of eco-terrorism. In March 2021, she called on her followers to overcome the individualism, white supremacy, toxic patriarchy that oil and gas companies weaponize. And in 2022, she said fossil fuel industry served as an effective method of birth control because she and others wouldn't have children to protect them from the climate change, which I don't hate that one, to be honest.
Dude,
but I mean, like, it's laughing, but you don't think that they've contrived Eitan and lied about his access to medical information to go after him. You don't think that they're going to say, oh, you're a coal worker in West Virginia who probably voted for Donald Trump, eco-terrorist. They went after paranoid schizophrenic. They went after Eitan. They're going after Elon Musk, the richest human in the history of the planet. And McDonald's, the most successful hamburger franchise ever. You don't think they're going to come after you because you're digging for coal, or you're an oil rig worker who just happens to vote for someone they don't want, and they won't use the levers of power if they're given? They will. You'll be targeted, and it won't require a chip up your nose.
Yeah, exactly. This is, you said it in the beginning of the show. We're coming at you with evidence of actual targeted individuals. And that's what we do. I mean, can you blame us with our backgrounds in law enforcement? We seek truth, but we want to be able to back it up. We don't want to just sit here and claim things with limited or no evidence. And every example brought to you today is, you know, people, I know there are still people out there who will say, yeah, that's just anecdotal. I mean, what are we on? Episode like 136?
The plural of anecdote is data.
Yeah. So there's plenty of data now to show that all of these government entities, especially, are targeting people, and it's not I'm gonna snatch you up in the middle of the night and implant the chip in your brain. And I mean, maybe there's some stuff we could get to. Like, over the weekend, I watched this movie called Black Mass. It's about Whitey Bulger. I didn't know this, but when he was in prison, he agreed to be experimented on with LSD 50 times. So has the government done stuff like that? Yeah, obviously.
They also let him off for years on all those murders because he was an informant.
Yeah, which, yes. And that maybe
FBI agent's in on it.
FBI agent, and that FBI agent, John Conley, retired, and they didn't come for him for a few years either. I want to say it was like 8 or 9 years until they indicted him. And it's like, because at the time that Whitey Bulger was his source, it was all good because they were targeting other people. Yeah. And then it's like, ooh, you know what? We think he might be complicit. I wonder. I'd like to see the files on John Conley and Whitey Bulger. Which will you ever? Probably not. Will you ever know the full truth? I don't know.
I don't know. I want the Kennedy assassination. That's
that too.
That's waiting to get it.
Yeah.
So got a couple minutes to let go here, Garrett. You want to give us a nice biblical worldview, and then I'm excited. I got a pretty funny little palate cleanse, I think, about targeted individuals and dads.
Yeah, I do. These books of wisdom have been really good for me lately. So like Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, and that's where we're headed today. Ecclesiastes 10, starting in verse 4, it says, "If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place." And I bring this section up because it may seem counterintuitive to a lot of what we bring forward, to a lot of what we say. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, which it has, I mean, it has personally for Steve and I, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. Clearly, I wasn't very calm today. I mean, I do get fired up over this stuff, but we have to remember that, well, it says right in the next verse, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Our governments throughout history are not infallible. And I think it's very clear that our own does have folly set in high places. I mean, just look at the types of behavior and types of things that are praised. Again, it always goes back to Romans 13 for me. It's the government punishing good and rewarding evil. And when you're in that place, your government has forsaken its divine position that was granted to it by God. And I don't know. I just want to always be able to drive that type of point home, because it's important for us to know these things so we can properly resist the tyranny. One of my favorite quotes is from our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. He loved it so much because I think it initially came from Franklin, but it's resistance to tyranny is what is it? It's resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. Jefferson loved it so much he had it put on his crest at his land in Virginia. And it's so true. Our founding fathers knew it. It's something we need to know as well. When your government becomes a tyrannical force like this, I mean, I think especially like Eithan's case, or that Varna guy from Oklahoma, honestly, any of them, Elon Musk, McDonald's, massive, rich people and businesses are still subject to the government's targeting and tyranny. So that's all from me.
Oh, Val, you sound like a radical extremist who probably is talking to another person online. I don't know.
Maybe
I could
I'm
be a
recruiting.
Fed.
I
could be a Fed.
I might be recruiting other parishioners too, Steve.
Well, you do talk to this Fed, but you talked to me on Saturday, and you are actually technically the Fed. So maybe you're recruiting me.
That's right.
I don't know. It's a complete mind bend. I might be being targeted even more than I'm already being targeted. But let's go to the palate cleanse. How a dad who's a tactical operator would target children. And this is just makes me laugh, and I'm going to give it a play. That's a flashbang, by the way. Oh. Digs a corner very well.
Yep.
And he sent 2 more to the primary target.
That's awesome.
Good tactics.
Well
That's a guy,
done.
for those listening, who has full-on helmet with NVGs shooting Nerf after throwing a flashbang.
I
Excellent
like it.
job.
I mean, it really was. He eliminated the first target, his little daughter, before entering the room, and then immediately digs a corner. It looked like another child was over there. I saw the tip of another Nerf gun, takes it out. Awesome.
And ultimate dad move. He had his daughter wearing eye protection for the entire demonstration. Well done. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. We will see you back here on Rumble, rumble.com/amradpod on Thursday, 08:30. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.